Okay, we can start the next session here with all our experts. How to change the federal policy. That's going to be a good challenge, right?
Yes. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I think people are taking this opportunity maybe to go grab a cup of coffee or a glass of water after that big lunch and a very good session between the two Daves there. Thank you. Very, very well done. I'm Larry Clemens. I work with the Nature Conservancy. I'm our North American Agriculture Program Director, so I cover our agricultural work across North America. I'm lucky that I only live about 2.5 hours away in northeast Indiana in a small town of Angola. Some of you probably are familiar with that. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be talking and moderating this panel about the Farm Bill and policy. And of course, this is a ripe subject right now because it is on the agenda in Washington. I was in Washington, D.C. last week. These fellows will probably have some insights to give you on where the Farm Bill's at, but certainly we will have a Farm Bill in the next few weeks. Not few weeks, few months. I think by the end of September. I predict by the end of September. They have to do something by then. But as we all know, we have tariffs, we have DACA, we have budgets, we have all sorts of things going on in Washington, D.C. right now. And quite honestly, I think it's hard for them to find floor time to debate the Farm Bill and all. So maybe we can have this a little bit more light on us. All of us up here got gray hair. We may find us laying our heads on the table going to sleep in darkness.
It's a good thing we wrote down notes, and then you turn the lights out.
Yeah. I think the way we're going to handle this here is Bill's going to go first, Jiim will go second, and then Larry will go last. Each will make a few comments and give various insights and perspectives on the Farm Bill. And we've got some great experience sitting here at this table, great leaders in agriculture and conservation over the years and all. I know each of them, and I've always respected all of them a lot. My experience with the Farm Bill actually started in 1985. And I was working in a soil and water conservation district in Indiana, and that's when the 85 Farm Bill came out. And I spent the first part of my career in conservation coloring soil survey maps. Red, some of you know this, especially some of my Indiana friends. Red for highly erodible, blue for hydric. And that was the level of our technology to begin working with growers on conservation compliance in that 85 Farm Bill. I've been around for all of them since then. I've been engaged in different organizations I've worked with. I've spent the last 25 years working with the Nature Conservancy and often helping lead our work around the Farm Bill. So it's an important piece of legislation, as all you all know, but it is by far the largest bill supporting private landowners out there and the ambitions we have for our lands and conservation. So with that, I'll moderate today. I don't think I'll have a lot to do, actually, because we got these guys up here. But I think I'll start with Bill here. And I don't have bios for each of you, so I have to make things up. You want me to make anything up? No, Bill, I think most people here, especially in this audience, knows Bill. And his leadership at NRCS, his leadership in Ohio, leadership in agriculture, and all. So I'll let him say anything more he would like to say, but again, I think the word I would use there is the leadership that he's shown over the years for this work. So, and I will point out too, we got 2 Ohio folks up here, and we got 2 Hoosiers sitting up here. So hopefully we'll get along okay. We're sitting pretty tight, but we're broke up here, and we'll be fine together. So, Bill, I'm going to hand it right to you, okay? Do you want to use this here? Or?
How about this one?
Okay.
I can handle this one. I think I can. Am I live?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and I always have to thank Randall. He keeps inviting me up here. If you people are getting tired of me, tell Randall. But it's a highlight each year. There's just so much to learn. This is one of probably the top no-till gathering of the country. Also, you notice who gets to go first. So sometimes age really pays. So I'm going to be very brief because really it's the time we have discussing things with each other that really counts the most. I was getting a little nervous, Dave. The last two speakers were really giving the land grant system a lot of, they were a little critical, weren't they, guys? And, we're all products of that system up here. I mean, starting clear back in 4-H with the Extension Service. I mean, we learned very early what sustainability was all about. It was very simple. Just whatever you're doing, leave it better than you found it. And that's sort of the basics that have meant so much to most of us. The local county agent, the local DC, we were personal friends. We worked together. So I'd have to say that our farm's just a product of that system over the years. We had Worcester up here with Dr. Triplett. And really, Worcester and Ohio really was the cradle of no-till, because over the past 50 years, that's where some of the original research was, and that's what it's developed. I chuckled at an earlier speaker who made some kind of a comment about, some places have soil 5 inches deep and some 5 foot. Well, those of us in Ohio are in that 5-inch area. And we no-till because it really pays. We have to. Most everyone in this room will have to admit that it's the system that's meant so much to all of us. And is that system sustainable? I use that word again, but we have a president that was elected with the promise of draining the swamp. Well, if we think about it, we may be part of the swamp. Most of us want the other swamp drained, not our swamp. So, we have to be very careful. We better be very conscious of participating in the politics that's what's coming. I really think ag programs and federal employees, we're going to be targets. We're going to be targets. Our system is going to get a real test. I was watching TV just Sunday night, and there's a new program on it, something about the revolution and politics in the country, and the Farm Bill was the subject, and the commentator was just ripping us apart on the money that big agribusiness, big farmers that don't need it, et cetera, is getting all this money. Well, there's some of those points that I couldn't disagree with, but we really got to change. We've heard so much in the last few hours about how we could really get a lot of the help that the public gives us moved over to conservation. I've contended for years that the public will be willing to pay for conservation and for improvement on the land because they'll understand they're getting something back. It's just our job to really shift in that direction. What should USDA really be doing? What help should we be getting? Well, as farmers, the first thing I would say that we need to be protected from things that we can't control on our own. And that, of course, would start with weather. I would say that I would put crop insurance first because that's the help that we really get, that we need. But what's second? Weather also is conservation. Weather is erosion. Weather is too much water, too little water, flooding. What about public help to help in these areas? Also, you'd have to go to research and extension. Research and Extension and the Soil Conservation Service. All those agencies have been so helpful through the years and have really built U.S. agriculture into the envy of the world. We need to be conscious, and we need to be protecting those things. And yes, we need to be protecting that part of the swamp that really has been what's brought us out of the swamp in many, many cases. Do we need the land grant system? Dave, I'll challenge you. Maybe they're not doing just what we want them to be doing, but that system is far better than anything that man has developed. What do we want from NRCS? I know there's a lot of NRCS people in this room. We've had a DC and a local staff in almost every county in this nation. We've had the DC out there helping us on the land. But that's, their staffs are being cut. That's getting harder and harder to do. Are we going to end up with regional or national offices with engineers, with the technology? Will the NRCS be only the ones that set the standards and develop the programs and deliver them to the state level? Something that we all better be thinking about. These are questions of policy that we're going to need to face. You know, President Trump has been very vocal on voluntary, on local control, and moving government back to the local level. So I think that he's sort of maybe opening the door. And are we ready to walk through that door? Are we ready to really get the kind of programs in this next farm bill that will move us in that direction? Maybe some good news. No, not maybe. It is good news. USDA has reorganized at the national level. They have combined under one undersecretary, he would be, the service parts of USDA. And Bill Northey, a farmer from Iowa, has been chosen to be head of that. We're calling him the super secretary because he is really over the agencies where the action has really happened. He will be the man that really will determine the directions that NRCS takes and the insurance industry takes. And he's a farmer that really understands, and he also is a good conservationist. What's the purpose of conservation programs? To me, it's been to get conservation on the land, but it's also been to change the behavior of those land users. We've done that with engineering, we've done it with technology, with education, and with demonstrations. From the last couple farm bills, we have, I'll mention 3 programs that are really the action front so far as delivering conservation. One of them, of course, is CRP, that's taken 30-some million acres out, the most fragile, we hope, of those acres, many of which acres that maybe shouldn't have been out. A few years ago when prices were high, we needed those acres. But that program has been very effective and very, very popular, especially with the wildlife interests of the nation. Then we also have CSP. It was a program that Jiim here helped dream up way back when he was there. That's a program that really rewards farmers, rewards conservationists for what they're doing. In other words, it rewards the good guys for the practices that have already been put in place. And then the third program that's there's a lot of funds flowing to the countryside is EQIP. And that's done a lot of good so far as building many livestock containments, many places where we were really going after a specific problem. But let's look at the principle. That in many cases is rewarding farmers that weren't doing a good job. So we've got something that we need to think about here. We have voluntary programs, but do we want those programs to come from rewarding good behavior or rewarding bad behavior? I'll never forget, I've been part of developing no-till for 40 more years. And after going through that first 20, 25 years of all that experiment and all that risk, well, then there was a program come out and they rewarded my neighbors and bought their equipment for them. Some of them are laughing, some of them are out there probably frowning. But there's a principle there, and how do we engineer our programs so that we get that fairness back in, and more importantly, get the job done. And of course, there's a fourth approach that we all know, and that if we don't meet the responsibilities, there could be regulation that says thou shalt do it this way. What is our responsibility as producers? Is it our responsibility to get the conservation on the land, or is it public? Because that's the results of which spill over on the public, the downstream public, and the public that really, in the long term, and we heard many cases this morning, that the world is going to need this food. We're going to need that increase in productivity. So whose responsibility is that? So, I'll ask that question, and then I want to say something about responsibility. What responsibility are we willing to accept in return for low-cost crop insurance? Because I think that's going to be one of the issues in the next Farm Bill, and that's going to be one issue that was going to cause some discomfort in the countryside. So let me close on responsibility, because I've developed this motto over the last years of my life. And it's this, that I think that we have the duty, yes, the moral responsibility, to use the best conservation technology available to control erosion, improve soil and water quality, and increase productivity in the production of food, fiber, and energy for the long-term benefits of people all over the world. With that, I thank you thank again for the participation, and turn it over to Jiim.
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim Moseley, farmer from Clarksville, Indiana. I identify myself as a farmer and a former, and I have more formers than just the sole responsibility of being a farmer. But I always identify first and foremost with being a farmer, because the farm's always there, and whenever I've left the farm, I've always done my duty when I leave to public service, but then the farm just beckons. As soon as I get done, I've got to go back. Bill, you bring up way too many things. I mean, there's just so much. There's so much richness here of things that we could talk about. I want to also applaud Randall, and I was going to say this is one of the best, just to give others a chance in terms of a seminar on conservation intelligence, just to give others a chance, but it's the best. Okay, and I've gone to several, and really, this one is just outstanding. So well done, so well attended, and I think that's indicative of the interest that farmers have here in this region of looking to do things far better than what we've done in the past. It's always a pleasure to be on a panel with Bill. We get that opportunity once in a while to be together, and Bill talked about CSP. I haven't figured out if Bill provided the egg and I provided the sperm or vice versa for that program. But I can tell you with all confidence that that program was developed in Bill Richards, for those of you who've been there, in Bill Richards' garage, which isn't a garage at all, in front of the fireplace. Bill and I have gotten together socially on and off for many, many years. As many of you know, I asked Bill to come into D.C. when I was there the first time as undersecretary and be the chief of NRCS. So we've had a long history. And, you know, after you get done doing that, working in D.C. and saying we were not going to go back, I wasn't going to go back for sure after I left in 1992. Then we got together and we started thinking about what we had done. And all of a sudden we began to realize that maybe there were a few things more that could be done. And so we worked over again in Bill's garage, putting EQIP together. And that, I took that at the time I was the Director of Agriculture in Indiana, and which means I served with NASDA. And we took that concept to NASDA. They were really active going into the '96 Farm Bill when Pat Roberts was chairman. And we made a mark. And we had unanimous consent by all of the secretaries and directors of ag across the country that an incentive-based program of some kind made a whole lot of sense in terms of serving the conservation needs of the country and, for the Southerners, capturing some money that might be lost. Because recall at the time, we were looking at a declining system in terms of subsidies for agriculture to the point where in 7 years, remember up to the '96 bill, they were going to be gone. And, you know, we were just kind of trying to sort out how can we preserve some of these dollars. So anyway, a little bit of history I hadn't intended to talk about, but it's really interesting. I would add one further point to that. Bill Northey, I know Bill fairly well, and Bill is a policy thinker. And so I have a lot of confidence in what he's going to be able to do. Bill Northey, I remember, taught me in the early phases of why we needed to shift from what we had in terms of government subsidies into something, he called it at the time revenue assurance. And that was the beginning of the discussion of really a change in this country about how we approach this whole question of disaster payments and how we handle then crop insurance. So I have a lot of confidence in Bill. I have, at this point in life, I don't get into the dealings daily of the Farm Bill and all that in D.C., and it's kind of refreshing to be out of the day in, day out, down in the weeds conversations and arguing over one word and what it means. I'm very comfortable being philosophical about it, and so in my remarks today, so it will be. It is going to be more philosophical, and I'm going to give you some thoughts, as Bill did, as far as background about how we shape policy, why we shape policy, okay? To light this up a little bit as a topic, then, I have to say that there is one primary question that still plagues me after 30-plus years of being involved in conservation policy, and that question is, how do we influence farmers overall to do a better job in conservation? And the question is the same today as it was back when I first started thinking about this. And there's been some improvement, don't get me wrong. We have made significant steps forward. But I think we all know, sitting in this room, there still remains a majority of farmers that are simply not doing the kinds of things that we'd like to see done really to improve our image with the public. And we're losing some of that image that worries me. Why are they lagging behind? And the question, what does it take to get them there? I really have no criticism about them. I'm not trying to pass judgment. I'm just simply trying to ask the question, what do we do to motivate those people? How do we and they make the decisions? And I think we can go back to no-till, which is commonplace now. Everyone in this room, I suspect, has practiced or is practicing no-till, knows what it's all about. But why did that decision get made in the beginning? What was the motivation? Was it conservation compliance that Bill had to deal with when he came in as chief, which is a regulatory, really, approach to it? Were decisions made because of incentives that came along out of government in some way, the EQIP program, for example? Was the decision to go to no-till pure economics? Remember back in the 80s, and there were a lot of farmers that were doing no-till that said, I'm doing this because I reduce fuel, I reduce trips across the field, I reduce capital on machinery after you got the transition made, okay? But it really was a cost issue. And of course, the question is, those individuals that just do it because it's in here. And this is something that the others maybe we can have government influence on, but the in here part, it's just in here, and government, they can't do that. Those are generational things. They're philosophical, they're spiritual things, values that we believe in. Okay. For now, the most common answer to the question from government is incentives. But as Bill pointed out, that question is being asked, are they working? And a budget tight time, and that's going to continue, we legitimately have to ask the question, are we getting good cost benefit from those incentives? And there's a couple of people who setting up here who were there at the inception of that and believe so strongly in it. It's a question that I really have to struggle with, and I have some reservations about what we're getting. So these are some of the kind of broad philosophical, in other words, the policy concepts that need addressed to actually improve policy. Otherwise, it's all about the money. And what I mean in that is, it's just, okay, let's all get together as a institution of agriculture, if you will, within the United States and say, we want our requisite share of the money. It's not about policy, and it's not about performance and something we will achieve. It's about money. And I've seen this become far more prevalent since the 2002 Farm Bill. If you recall, I'll refresh your memory with some history. We had a surplus in the federal budget going into the 2002 Farm Bill. And the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, I can't remember his name, Texas, how soon we forget.
Yeah.
But he moved the Farm Bill ahead 1 year because we had a surplus to develop a higher baseline and protect the dollars for agriculture. That was really the first approach that was made in terms of just simply getting the money. And we kidded about it. This wasn't about policy. This was about making sure that agriculture got their requisite share of the dollar. So we have to kind of make a decision, what kind of government do we really want? What do we expect? Is there a role for government? Fundamental question. I believe there is. What is that role? What can it provide? Does it just solve societal problems, which I think is really what we would like to see, or does it become and evolve to something that we just get together in the appropriations battle every year and say, this is ours, and we fight to the death in order to keep that money? That approach, folks, worries me, because the demographics in that battle are clearly against us. Couple more brief points, because I want to get also to discussions and questions. That's the most fun that we have in these sessions. Conservation in this farm bill, Larry, I know he is closer to it than what I am, but my observation is, A, we're not going to have a farm bill until lame duck session of Congress.
Maybe.
Going into an election, it's pretty tough, but we will get a farm bill in that lame duck. And they'll just do a continuation of the existing bill until we get to that point. That's speaking of experience, because everybody talks about we're going to get a farm bill done, and it never, ever, ever happens. So I'm just betting the odds, okay? It's track record, and it's pretty straightforward for me. As far as the discussion around the farm bill that I've watched over the last year and a half, I've been kind of disappointed because it's been basically, we'll just maintain the status quo in conservation policy, and also really in crop insurance and Title I and Title II, Title X. We're just going to maintain the status quo. Well, I guess that's okay, but the thing that bothered me was we've had kind of an unprecedented amount of new information and enthusiasm beginning to come forth in this area of soil health. All right? You're all here because you're excited about soil health. And so if you have this kind of beginning to sweep across the landscape with farmers, I guess I kind of expected there would be something innovative that would come out in this legislation that would really move us insofar as government is capable, but move us forward a little bit, and it just hasn't happened. The problem with that is that I point those fingers out there at those people that are working with it every day, and there's these three that keep pointing back at me. And when that happens, and I have to ask myself the question, so what is that special thing? Frankly, I'm drawing blanks myself for anything that's as significant as what CRP or CSP or EQIP or so forth was, okay? Except for one very small item, and that is, I didn't mention, I've been co-chairing with Dan Glickman for the last 7 years an activity called Agree. And we were asked if we would, 7 years ago, funded by Ford, Rockefeller, Walton, Cerdna, a whole bunch of foundations that had quite a bit of money, and they came together, ironically, because they had always fought with one another and said, this isn't working, can we work together on agricultural policy? And asked Glickman and I if we would kind of put that together. We're still involved with that. One small item that has come out of that discussion is that the world of big data, of course, is sweeping across agriculture, and we're getting, I think, very positive benefits from the way that those folks in that technical area are accomplishing the analysis and giving it back to us so we can make better decisions. What we found out, though, was that that's in the private sector. But in the public sector, it's really difficult for the folks that we depend upon in institutions like the land grant system and so forth to access a wealth of data that is held in NRCS and RMA and FSA and NAS. And so we've worked on this project for a year and a half, and last week Senator Thune and Senator Klobuchar introduced a very small, and I can't emphasize how small I think it is, a piece of legislation that really is an encouragement. It'll be more than encouragement to those agencies when it is passed, but it's an encouragement to those agencies, hey, get your act together and make this data so we can collate it and so we can access it and so we can do a better job of giving answers to some tough questions. And one of the tough questions I think that we need to answer, and if we answer it, it forwards conservation. This is where a small deal becomes a larger deal, is this whole question about what is the linkage between those farmers who are doing good conservation practices related to their net profitability. Now I can spend too much time talking on it. Yes, individuals are trying to make that correlation, but their data sets are hard to come by. They have to do surveys. Surveys are suspect. USDA holds real data. And so you take the real data, this is what the researchers tell me, you take the real data and you, whatever they do, synthesize it into a real solution. And once you get that, then you can begin to develop policy around it. What's the one question that farmers want answered relative to conservation? How's it going to help me in terms of profitability? That's the number one and first question I want answered out of this, because then we begin to develop a background and a base for the answer to the question. So, it's a small deal, but I'm kind of enthusiastic about what the potential is. Final point, big picture. There's three things that are important to the global supply. This goes back to Dave and Dave. Three things. Genetics, clearly. Technology, and the implementation of the modern technology. We hear about that all the time. It's a three-legged stool, though, and I've only got two legs, okay? The third leg to that stool, if we're going to produce enough to feed that population, came out of what we didn't agree. If we feed that population 2040, 2050, and 2060, we have. If we don't do soil health, we have an unstable stool. And if we have, that's kind of dangerous, is it, an unstable stool? Think about that for a second. But if we are absent that, we don't get there, folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and appreciate those comments. And Larry, I know you're going to wrap us up, and then we'll get right in. So be thinking about some of your questions that you might have with these folks, and we'll get the discussion going here fairly quickly.
Thank you. Larry Antosch with the Ohio Farm Bureau. If you notice in your program, I do not have a former before any of my titles, which means that I haven't been around as long and have as much wisdom as and experience as these folks here that I get to share the table with. But my role with the Ohio Farm Bureau is through overseeing our policy development process and also dealing with environmental policy. And so from that perspective, talk about conservation programs in Ohio, how they've been utilized, how Farm Bill programs have made a difference, and to focus on, if you remember, if you were here earlier, Dave Brandt had a very nice slide of Lake Erie with a lot of green water floating around. We have a lot of attention in Northwest Ohio on Lake Erie. probably not as much attention as we maybe could have or maybe should have on the southern two-thirds of Ohio, drain down into the Ohio River and ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico. Same types of issues, a little farther away, not as visible to the folks in Ohio, and so because of that, focus has been up into northwest Ohio. But Ohio, with the challenges we have with water quality and nutrient management, conservation, puts us in a unique situation. And we have a lot of good partnerships that have been established in Ohio in terms of dealing with the issues, not only from utilization of private dollars. A lot of producers, a lot of the farmers in Ohio are putting conservation practices on their own, on their fields, on their own. They're not wanting to get involved with the federal government for one reason or another. Might be because they're number 18 on a list or number 80 on a list, and it's just going to take time for things to happen. So there's a lot of interest and a lot of efforts individually taking place. From the Farm Bureau perspective, from our policy perspective, from the American Farm Bureau perspective, prefer conservation programs that are directed towards working ground rather than, let's say, set aside or retirement programs. Not to say that there aren't areas or fields or things that need to be protected and possibly addressed and taken out of production because they're not the most beneficial. But to make sure that we're focusing our programs, or the programs are being focused on active ground, on working ground, in terms of EQIP and CRP and all that. Lots of good things happening, a lot of research going on. One of the things that we were able to do with a partnership with NRCS, utilizing Great Lakes, GLRI, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funds. Too many acronyms. You never really know the words. You always hear the acronyms, but been able to, and again, establish a series of demonstration farms here over in the Blanchard River watershed. Again, the idea behind those is to be able to show individuals, show farmers, show decision makers, show the general public what agriculture is doing in terms of addressing the nutrient management concerns, putting practices out, evaluating them, demonstrating them, talking about them. If they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. That's fine. But you have to be able to show it and do it and be able to talk about it. A lot of good discussion came up in the previous presentations here from the standpoint of we are losing, to a certain extent, losing what I call our social license, or agriculture social license. Society allows farmers to do what you're doing as long as they trust that you're doing the right thing. And as we start losing that social license, we start seeing some of the regulations coming into play. Because I've got a slide, that I just have like a parking meter with time expired. Time is running out. The fines are starting to come in. In Ohio, we have some regulations that are statewide dealing with fertilizer management, certification for nutrient application, some restrictions in Northwest Ohio on fertilizer and manure application. Again, looking at what the issue is, green lake, green water. What you're doing must not be right because we still have that green water. We need to start doing some other things. But conservation programs along the way are helping out too in terms of getting things on the ground and things working that way. The RCPP program, largest one, the first year at Tri-State, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. Very, very successful, about 60 or so partners involved with that program, demonstrating and putting conservation on the ground through a partnership agreement that is outstanding. I believe we're in the last year or getting close to the last year of that program. It was one of the first programs that went out. What we're trying to do is to make sure we have some of the answers and the ability to continue some of our edge of field monitoring, to be able to evaluate conservation practices, to be able to document what the impact is, and then be able to take those and demonstrate them elsewhere. Very key. We can do there's things we can do now to address the nutrient management, water quality concerns, but there's other things that we still have to learn about, and making sure that we have the right answers, the science behind the policy as we go forward. We know that we're dealing with a situation that is not a one-size-fits-all. What works for me may not work for you. And so we need to be able to have that flexibility and that to be able to address those issues, those concerns. Question came up of why aren't individuals participating in some of the programs? Sometimes it's that long lag time between signing up and finally getting on the short list, if you make it to the short list. A little bit on this big data. Some folks don't want their name in the database. They're afraid that someone's going to come find them and know what they're doing. And they don't want that to happen, which is not a very positive thing from the standpoint of we need to be able to know how we're moving the needle. And the only way we know how much we're moving the needle is by being able to track and document what's happening on the landscape. Unfortunately, those databases are not readily available, and we would need to make sure that we have the ability to aggregate and take away the addresses, but be able to at least show between year 1 and year 5, this is the changes that were made. We all don't have soil samples that we can show from over a 15-year time period to show the change in the soil sample. One of the last things I just want to talk about is how do we match reality and expectations in terms of environmental benefit, in terms of response of the system. We saw earlier with the slides of the soils how it takes time. It takes time to go from that brown to the black soil, building up that soil health, building up that soil quality. Natural systems take time to also react from the standpoint of when that management practice goes in the field to what the end result is in terms of the water quality in the watershed. Society does not want to give us that flexibility. The fact of if we really go out and say what it's going to take 10 to 20 to 30 years before you start seeing the results of these programs, it's not going to fly. So we need to come up with ways of being able to track incrementally along the way. It may not be the actual water quality monitoring aspect, but still being able to mark those changes. So in Ohio, the conservation programs in the Farm Bill have been very good. The challenges we have are that, as with everything else, technical resources have been reduced. So how do you deliver the programs that are out there? How do you get those addressed? If it's a move down or a shift from federal to state to local, state budgets are also in the same situation. Local budgets are even worse. And so that whole technical delivery of resources, of information becomes the biggest challenge. And thinking about how can we continue that and to move that forward, it will become something we need to work on.
All right, thank you. I know we're down to probably less than 10 minutes there. It looks like 10 minutes. There's got to be questions after those presentations or discussions, so I'll point to you right there.
Jim, you were mentioning about going to the 2040, 2050 housing supply. What I have seen with my operation, I have been able to cut the cost way down. Our cattle way back many, many years ago. We didn't have that, we needed. Today, we almost got to have that all the time. Can we reduce the need for what you're saying of high feed, food for the country, for the world, by raising the protein and having better feed going to the animals and us, by instead of having so much legislation in, promote that part of it more in when you're talking to the congressman, whatever, that would bring in less need for feed and better protein and better food for all of us.
Okay.
Add that into making everything come together.
Well, it depends on if you're a vegetarian or not, how you answer that question. But good point. I make the assumption that we're going to continue to have a blend, a mix of food sources forever, and that livestock protein is going to be a part of that. And so what that comes down to is I have some friends in the West that say soil health really doesn't it isn't an issue of conversation for me, because we're just foragers. Well, no, it is for you too. It's for everyone. So it's not just crop production lands that we're talking about here in soil health. It is across the production of the entire food chain. So, I just make the assumption in policy that we are going to actually have to produce more protein, making the assumption, animal protein, making the assumption that we will not change the fact that people who move from low income into higher income, middle class, one of the first things they want is animal protein. And I don't think we're going to rewrite that.
Yeah. The United Nations estimates that by 2050, we will have to increase by 73% the amount of protein that's produced to feed the world population at that point. So it's definitely going to be increasing.
I think the issues on the other side of it is how much protein will we luxuriously consume?
Yeah. Question right here in front.
I got a good question for Ohio. My taxes my land taxes got raised 2 years ago because of the CAUV readjustment on that there. So the simple way to get us into cover crops would have been that we, on 20 acres, that my taxes come back to where they were 2 years before. This would be half back to, I was 26, 52. I was planting 20 acres of cover crop, which is around back to 26. And, it was simple, it didn't cost them to take any money out of pockets from the government, because of the fact that they got a move out. I thought the Farm Bureau should basically see if they could do that.
I can take that concern back to our CAUV folks. That is not my area, but I know that we've just had some reductions in CAUV, but
You're the only one that states, you know,
I understand.
depending on that there.
Well, there's been some talk, and this will work. There's been talk, and I get questions like, if you're doing the proper conservation methods, shouldn't you have a discount on your real estate tax? And in theory, I said yes, but you try to get that through. I mean, the school boards of the state and the people that are getting the money on the other end. I think CAUV's done a fantastic job for us. We're lucky, but tax policy, local tax policy, has been something that we've never really addressed so far as an incentive. Now, the other side of that is there's been a lot of talk about a better insurance rate on crop insurance if we're really doing a good job with conservation. The problem is the insurance agents industry comes back and asks us, can you prove that there's less risk with the good conservation? And then we farmers say, oh, yeah, we can prove it, but you can't have my data to prove it. So, yeah, I know. But we yes.
And we're going, I think we can fix that. Okay.
I hope that's a short run problem, but the basic thing, guys, we've got to have that data that shows that we're doing a good job and that we can prove that it's a societal benefit, and we don't have that.
We got money coming in from Northwest Ohio here, there's lake, clean up the water, to get enough coast options, one of the better things to do is clean up the water. And so that's why basically, you can't take the federal money and give that to the farmers to put out something else. Basically, like I said, it's gotta come from the other way around.
We've been having a lot of talks with RMA over the last year and a half, and I think you're going to see, I feel the tension here, and I think we're going to see, yes. Yeah. I do have a question, Larry, that I need to ask, because and we're not going to get all of you to answer right now, but afterwards. I was going to mention, and I didn't because I got way too windy. There's a run at CSP that it could be eliminated. We spend $1.4 billion on, I looked at the USDA budget, $1.4 billion a year on CSP and $1.4 billion on EQIP. Now, Bill and I kind of felt like that EQIP got lost. And that's the reason why we came along and started thinking about a different kind of a program. But the difference between the programs are significant. EQIP is asking or giving you money to do something. CSP is paying you after you've done it and proven that you've accomplished it. CSP was put in place to create a number of model farms around the country, because farmers learn from farmers across the fence row. And the idea was to accomplish that. Now, CSP got lost too. Okay? It got lost. It got way too complex, too complicated, and NRCS is directly responsible for that. The question is, though, which would you rather have? I'm curious. Would you rather have EQIP? Or would you rather have CSP? And I'm going to ask you that question not just from your personal perspective, as far as what it might mean to you, but I'm going to ask the question from the perspective, look at good governance. And how do you view governance? And based upon that, which way would you go to provide that, if at all? Okay? I don't know how if we raise hands or how we do it, but yes, let's find out how he's going to tell us how we're going to do it, right? No.
Well, I can do that, because I know we got to get to a break, but how many favor an approach of the CSP or Conservation Security Program? A few hands out there. How much favor an approach of like the EQIP program of a direct payment to install a practice? It's yeah.
The problem with EQIP is it only protects that whole area. It does not protect the whole
System,
I mean, it's like the diapers we put on all the streams. You know, we put a 30 or 80 foot diaper on there, and today they're polluting more than when the diaper wasn't there because they're full of phosphorus. So you need to address the whole problem, and CSP addresses the whole problem, where EQIP only addresses that one.
I'm getting the cut back there. See, yeah, you did. I agree. I think this man back here had a question, but I know we got to cut, so we got to go to break, and we don't want to throw the agenda off here. But I hope you'll bring your question up to one of the panelists if you have a question also. Thank you, everyone.
He said we keep going.
Oh, he said to keep going. Never getting the keep